Welcome back. This is our 7th and last important lesson for Pingji. We'll be covering a variety of different topics that I didn't cover in the other lessons. Let's start with the first one, which is words with no vowels. Our first word is This is probably one of the top 5, maybe even top 3 words in Cantonese. It means not. And as you guessed, it will negate a vast majority of words. What makes this word special other than its frequency is its pronunciation. It's literally just a sound with a low falling tone. There are actually no other words with the sound, so because of how insanely important this word is, and being the only one of its tone, you never write the tone. This is just the letter M. Drill that low falling tone in your head because this word deserves it. On that note, we also have several words that are pronounced as and unlike these come in 3 different tonal flavors. The low rising tone is the most notable as it has the words for the number 5 and the word for noon, which are highlighted in red and blue respectively. Because there are different tones, these usually do need to be written out with their tone letter. That said, because the low rising tone is vastly more common than the others, you could just get away as spelling this with a Q and no tone letter. Sound shifts. This is the word for the pronoun you, Nate. However, what you might actually hear from people speaking colloquially, especially those in Hong Kong, is late. So what happened was the N sound was replaced with an L sound. Another sound shift that happens is that words that start with an ng sound will drop that sound so that it starts with a vowel instead. So for example, this is the word for me, ngo. Sometimes this could be dropped and become o. Again, it's just another thing to be aware of. Should you write these changes, like replacing N's with L's and dropping the Q's? Well, that's kinda up to you. I generally prefer writing the original sound before the sound shift, because you can narrow down the intended word better, and from there you can always choose to pronounce it differently if you like. You can't go the other way though. For example, if I wrote the word for you as lay with an L, we don't know if the word was supposed to be nay or lay originally, and those are actually 2 different words. But ultimately, it depends on how you want to express yourself. It's kind of like in English, how when we speak, we rarely say going to. It's often shortened to gonna. So if you're quoting someone or you're trying to reflect their actual speech, gonna is more accurate. So in the same manner, use whichever way you want to represent what you want the reader to understand. Anyways, on to our next topic, tones 7 through 9. Some of you who have done some research may have been thinking to yourself during the tone lecture, I heard there were 9 tones in Cantonese. Well, kind of. The last 3 tones are called check tones. Practically speaking though, those 3 tones are the same as the 3 flat tones we've already discussed. What makes them distinct is that they end with a stop consonant. And words that end with stops are pronounced even more abruptly than words that don't. So for example, sick, sec, and sick. So to some linguists, this warranted giving them their own tone names, 7, 8, and 9. The modern standard is to just count these the same as the other flat tones, 1, 3, and 6. The apostrophe. Here's just a little quick thing about the first tone, which uses the apostrophe. Number 1, officially the apostrophe mark is a single straight mark. Unfortunately, Microsoft Office changes these to the comma-shaped single quotation marks you see here. For casual purposes, this is fine if it ends up looking like that, but try to use the straight one when possible. In Office, there are autocorrect settings that change punctuation marks, so that's where you'd have to go in those programs at least if you want to keep it strictly to the straight apostrophe mark. Number 2, one thing I want to address is what if you can't use the apostrophe for whatever reason? Well, the rule here, if there's no tone letter at all, we can treat this as the high flat tone, with the apostrophe simply missing. I know this isn't ideal because you really need that marker to tell you to switch to a high pitch right away, but I think the circumstances of where this would be an issue is limited to very specific cases. For example, where you need to only enter alphanumeric characters in a text box. Next, let's talk about changed tones, also known as binyam in Cantonese. And basically what happens is that a word may change its tone based on grammar, context, or emphasis. Remember these words from last lecture? Well, the first syllable for mom in mama is a change tone. You notice that the word for mother is written with two of the same character, ma, and in the dictionary that's a high flat tone. But we don't say mama, it's mama. Here's another example from that same lesson. When you want to talk about the word for fish by itself, it's yu. But with some words, for example, yu tao, meaning fish head, the tone changed to a falling tone instead. So how do we write this? In Pingji, you should just write the tone that actually matches the way you'd say it in its given context. But also, you need to link the words together. In this case, I use a hyphen, which brings us to our next topic, compounding words. So in this part, I want to talk about combining or compounding words. For example, we know in Mandarin, you can often write two characters as one quote-unquote word, like ni hao. And in Pinyin, when combining the word can cause some confusion, you use the apostrophe. For example, Xi'an gets an apostrophe to separate itself from Xian, which are completely different things. Xi'an is two different words put together, but Xian is one single word. So that works great for Pinyin, but in Pingji, we have some problems. Well, one, while Mandarin words could only end with N or NG, or just a vowel, there are a lot of letters a word can end with in Pingji, so writing characters as one big word can confuse things. For example, in the word ha gao, even though you know that the first part is first tone, you may have to do a double take to make sure that the G in the middle is not a low flat tone, like ha ao. It's much easier to read separated, using a space like this. That said, if the second part of a combined word is a first tone that uses an apostrophe, then by all means feel free to combine because it's obvious. Otherwise, hyphens work really well. For anything that doesn't use the apostrophe, this is the safest way to combine words and should generally be your standard way of forming single words to avoid ambiguous readings. Also, when I was discussing change tones, any word that changes its tone as part of another word must be written as one word in Pingji, either with a hyphen or just written as one whole word. Otherwise, in all other cases, feel free to write multi-character words as a single word when it feels right. Also, a good rule of thumb, if the second word you're compounding starts with a letter that can act as a tone letter, then just use a hyphen. So that would be these 7 guys. So once again, going back to these words for mother and paternal grandmother, because of the changed tone, ma has to be written as one word, which I've done like so. This is almost automatic because the second part has an apostrophe. Now for ma. I left the hyphen out because it's more obvious here that the S is a tone letter, since the M after it must be the start of a new word. This brings us to our last spelling rule for tones, which is going back to the first tone. So if you do decide to compound a word, then you don't need to use the special rule where you put an H after the letters W, S, C, and Z, because we could simply just do things more efficiently in this case by adding an apostrophe. So here are 2 examples. I have the words Taiwan, which means Taiwan, and EC, which means meaning. So if you write these as one word, then I prefer you to write them like this, using an apostrophe. Again, that's just because Pingji is all about efficiency. And remember, this only applies when the second word can use an apostrophe. If it's the first part of the word, then this doesn't apply. You have to spell them using the normal rules, which includes using the letter H. Alright, shifting gears from tones, we're going to talk about some extra optional letters. Remember how Pingji is all about efficiency with letters, right? Well, here are 3 doubled letters that we can potentially simplify. The downside is we're going to need some non-standard letters to do so, so what I'm about to show you is purely optional. But the idea is quite simple. We're going to substitute those letters with these letters with 2 dots on them. Remember these letters when we were talking about vowels? They're from German, and those 2 dots are called umlauts. In German, you can use those exact 3 letters written out here. But if you can't type an umlauted letter for whatever reason, then it's completely okay to write them as AE, UE, or OE. The umlaut actually came about as a shorthand for those letter combinations. We'll do the same thing here, except the umlaut represents a doubled letter. 2 dots meaning 2 of that letter. Pretty simple, right? Here's an example here. You can see that it's just shorter. The next question you might ask is, how would you even get those characters? Well, since I kept mentioning they were in German, you can simply use a German keyboard. That is to say, if you really like using these letters, simply install a German keyboard on your phone or computer and use that for typing Pingji. It's really easy to do. So just to illustrate how it looks, here's a poem I used in my older video. You can see the double letters at the title and in the first line. And now using the umlauts. Let me know what you prefer. And as a bonus, your practice for today is to read this poem. The next part is purely for the sake of completion, how to deal with quotation marks. Thanks to the tonal system, Pingji often uses apostrophe at the start of words. Unfortunately, this could get very messy to read with standard English quotation marks, as you can see here, making this an extremely awkward situation if you do want to put things in quotes. But in case you didn't know, quotation marks are not universal. Many languages have their own sets of quotation marks, including Chinese. Here are some examples of quotation marks used in multiple European countries. The German ones are perfect because they don't have anything that interferes with the starting apostrophe. It's kind of funny because they face the opposite direction, but otherwise, they work. Now to put it in action, see how the apostrophe is no longer obscured here? Now finally, how do you actually use these weird quotation marks? Well, it's the same way you use the umlauts. You can use a German keyboard, which you can always just set on your PC or mobile device. In this channel, I'll be using these quotation marks for Cantonese words, and English quotation marks for English words. Anyways, that's the last of our miscellaneous but important rules to consider. And that covers everything else you need to know about Pingji. As a bonus, I'm just going to give you some tips on how to convert Yutping to Pingji. You'll find that Yutping is the most used romanization out there at this time, and notably, it's what you'll see in Google Translate or other dictionaries. So if you want to convert, this is basically what you need to do. This table shows you all the spelling changes if you're going from Yutping to Pingji. The consonants are pretty similar, so there are only two changes there. Whenever you see a J in Yutping, turn that to a Y in Pingji. Or if you see an NG, turn that to a Q. The finals are quite a bit different, so you can just refer to the chart here. When you see the red asterisk at the bottom, it means that any final consonant or even no final consonant would work. And here's the reverse, going from Pingji to Yutping. Remember that Pingji can also have spelling changes to tones, so you have to remove the tone letter and then apply the Yutping tone number. So as for tones, the two systems are wildly different. Yutping gives you numbers, so you have to remember what each number actually represents in Yutping. From there, just apply the corresponding tone letter rule in Pingji. You can apply the same thing in reverse to go from Pingji to Yutping. This chart from the tone video can help with that. And that's it for the series. Thanks for making it all the way through, and if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Ngoi!